Any questions there? Somebody asked about the presentation, and I have a PDF to Jennifer, so you can definitely ask. I'm sure she'll continue to make that available to you. If we go through the self-evaluation process, some other areas for you to be looking at in terms of policies, practices, and procedures. It is a comprehensive review of your policies, practices, and procedures. As a public entity, you should identify non-compliant policies and practices and where you need to make modifications. So I have a lot of municipalities that have certain ordinances or park regulations about dogs in parks and that they have to be on a leash. And the updated ADA regulations say that a service animal in its act of providing a service to a person with a disability might need to be performing that task off leash. So in that type of situation, we would need to identify the ordinance or the regulation and work to modify the ordinance or the regulations so that it was consistent with the ADA regulations and allowing the service animal to go off leash in order to assist the person with a disability. So I have quite a handful of those types of ordinances that need to be updated to more consistently apply the service animal regulation to the local ordinance. So you would look at identifying that, putting into place the process to make the modification to the policy or practice and bring it into compliance. Through the self-evaluation process, you're also looking at an opportunity for people with disabilities and interested in parties to review and comment, and it should be on file for at least 3 years under the regulations, but I recommend that it's an ongoing updated file that you continue to make available to members of the public as it is requested. The National Network of ADA Centers has updated a guidance that was funded really early on after the ADA was passed. It was one of my go-to documents or publications. It's called the ADA Title II Action Guide for State and Local Governments. If you still have this book in your library in your place, go look for it because it is gold. There are no printed copies of it. It's an excellent publication. But a couple of years ago, the Institute for Human-Centered Design, they updated it and made it available as an electronic guide. So you can go onto their website and pull up different self-evaluation forms and sample documents to use to do a more specific review of your policies, practices, and procedures. So I just want to kind of go through here and then we'll see if there's any other questions on the self-evaluation, and then I'll continue on with the transition plan. But what are the questions that you need to ask in your self-evaluation? So you're looking at reviewing all of your policies, practices, and procedures. And really the question is, does the policy, practice, or procedure screen out or prohibit individuals with disabilities from participating in and enjoying the benefits of programs, services, or activities? And then maybe dividing that up in terms of no action is required, action is required for ADA compliance, or action is recommended as a best practice of inclusion of people with disabilities. So at a swimming pool, we have a lot of swimming pools or swimming lessons or even childcare programs that say that an individual has to be toilet trained in order to participate. So that's an instance of a policy, practice, or procedure that we have in place, and you need to go back to each of those individual instances of program, service, or activities that is applied and ask, does it prohibit individuals with disabilities from participating or enjoying the benefits of the program services or activities. And for each entity, that question might be answered a little bit differently for each entity and for each individual program, service, or activity. What are the documents that you should be looking for? This is kind of a general rundown of the different types of documents that I request. What the organizational chart, organization and departmental procedure manuals, brochures on your program services and activities, if you have any rules or regulations or ordinances, employment applications, employee handbooks, emergency preparedness plans, licensing criteria, special use permits, waivers and release forms, sample meetings and other public notices, complaint forms, and specific departmental units or procedures for serving people with disabilities through the provision of auxiliary aid services or modifications of policies. Through my process, we go in, after we do a review of all of those documents, we do interviews. We interview with key personnel across all of the departments. The self-evaluation is a very intrusive process. You know, we're scratching down to how we do things as an entity. And so for me, and because we're working in the process of including people with disabilities, I feel it's really important that everybody feels included in the process. So we make sure that the interviews include representation from all departments across all units. We want to know how that department or unit operates, how they interface with the public, what are the functions that they provide, and how may the policies or procedures affect our residents or visitors and the services that they receive or the programs that they participate in. You know, so from the very get-go in the process, we want to make sure that everybody feels that they're welcome and included and have a place at the table, because when it comes down to it, we're going to go back and we're going to make recommendations for modifying policies. And if they haven't been felt to be included at the beginning of the process, when we ask them to modify a policy, there might be a little bit resistance there because they haven't felt included or having a place at the table at the very get-go. So that's why we feel it's really important to make sure everybody is included up front. Asking about the notice to the public. Does the agency have a notice to the public? How is it communicated? Is it available on more than just a web page? I've given you a couple links there. You could go in and actually just do a Google search quick. Cleveland Metro Parks is an example. They have an accessibility statement on their website. The city of Milwaukee, I've worked with their city ADA coordinator for a couple of years now, Becky Rabitan. I think she's awesome. She went out and did a search and review of all different size municipalities and the ADA information that they provide on their website. And she pretty much brought together all of the best examples in creating her own section of the city website on accessibility and inclusion of people with disabilities. So if you need to update your notice to the public in the section on your website, I would say copy and paste hers because it is fantastic. There's a lot of people like Becky out there working in the field that are putting out some really great examples for us. Our designated official, who is the designated official? How is the person contacted? Is that different from the ADA coordinator? Should there be different contacts for different programs, services, or activities? What's your grievance procedure? When should the individual expect to receive a response if they do file a grievance? And, you know, what I will say about your grievance procedure is that I want my community of individuals with disabilities to feel like if they have had a negative experience in one of my program services or at one of my parks or facilities, I want to have a relationship with them that they will call me directly and tell me about it, as opposed to posting it on social media or in a Yelp review or on Facebook or tweeting about it. I want to hear directly from them in order to make adjustments. I have at least 2 agencies right now that their complaints came in through social media. And what happens when it gets posted on social media, it's like wildfire. Everybody finds out about it. And, you know, in this particular situation, that Yelp review is going to be up there forever, you know, and it's really hard to combat those types of negative reviews when it's a platform that people so readily go to and rely on that information. But my grievance procedure, I want to make sure up front that people know who to contact, to contact me directly if they're still at the facility, maybe even looking at having a poster so that they'll talk to staff, making sure that staff know what to do in terms of receiving that type of informal feedback as a frontline service provider. And then how do you follow up, and making sure that you're documenting how you're following up and making adjustments as needed. And then making sure that you're getting input from people with disabilities. How do you do that now? What groups might you need to tap into in your organization? There's a lot of different ways that you can look at one-time events and then ongoing types of events and relationship building. How do you provide auxiliary aids and services? How do individuals with disabilities make requests for those services? Is it a centralized or decentralized process? Meaning, do they ask within the program itself, or do they still contact the accessibility coordinator? Does the ADA coordinator really want to receive the request for captioning or sign language interpreters for a Saturday night movie in the park event? Or is that something that's more appropriately received by the program coordinator themselves? Is the equipment ready to go and in place? Have your service providers been identified? Do you know who those are? Do you have any types of agreements or contracts put in place with them? And then also looking at, after the program, how do you evaluate the quality of the auxiliary aid or service that has been provided? How are you providing alternate formats? How is it communicated that you even provide those alternate formats? Again, is that centralized or decentralized? And is staff trained on how to receive and process those requests? Disability-related inquiry, I think this is really important for those of us in Parks and Recreation that have registration forms. You know, recognize that you cannot ask the question, do you have a disability, on your registration form, but you can ask questions like, do you have a disability-related need? And give examples of those. And we have an example on the website now on Accessibility Management News that you can go to and kind of copy and paste that sample question. And then we're actually going to be updating it probably next month to include other examples and how they do that for a couple other events. But, you know, if you're asking for medical forms, why are you asking for those medical forms? You know, why do you need those questions filled out? You know, I think that's a struggle for us in Parks and Recreation when we have short programs versus day-long programs or week-long programs, when we're responsible for the care, health, and safety of minors that might not be able to make decisions for themselves. So we need to look at those and making sure they're consistent with safety needs and business necessity. Eligibility criteria, again, making sure that eligibility criteria does not screen out people with disabilities. Is it consistent with skill sets? You know, if you're providing beginner swim lessons, you probably don't have a eligibility criteria, but if it's advanced or intermediate swim lessons, the criteria most likely is that they have passed all of the prerequisites from the beginner class. You know, we have this question all the time in terms of age requirements, and you know, if a program is for 5 to 7-year-olds and all of a sudden the child has a developmental disability, and while their developmental age might be 5 or 7, they're now 10 chronologically, it's probably not appropriate to have a 10-year-old in a program that's geared for 5 to 7-year-olds. So we need to make those types of decisions and determine that through our eligibility criteria. And then in the new regulations, there's much more specific examples for how we look at the provision of service animals in our public spaces, what we can and cannot ask in terms of what a service animal does, what types of restrictions might need to be put into place, and then what that rationale is, and making sure that it's consistent with business necessity or direct threat. So for example, you know, you might have an area that is protected wilderness area. The national parks, I think they're a really great example. They have updated their policies and procedures so not to specifically prohibit service animals, but part of the process to get a backpacker permit into the protected wilderness area is that those backpackers have to come in and meet with the ranger staff, where the ranger staff go over the risk involved. And the risk involved, you know, in that type of situation is not necessarily the risk to the environment. The risk actually is to the service animal and the other animals out in the wilderness that may become predators to the service animal. And so they want to make sure that all of their folks that are coming in and getting backpacking wilderness permits understand that risk, and so that they can make that informed decision. Other power-driven mobility devices, the regulations are have been clarified with that. Do you have a policy about, you know, there's a lot of people that use golf carts and want to use golf carts on our trails. What is your policy in terms of gas-powered devices or other types of devices, segways, and those, and are they consistent with business necessity and direct threat issues? And it's really important that we're going through and looking at the assessment of a direct threat that is consistent to that of a safety assessment as well. And then where are the places that we need to evaluate on a case-by-case basis to make those reasonable modifications? You know, what's the process involved? Who are the people included in the process? Is it centralized or decentralized? Making sure that we have staff that are trained on disability and ADA compliance, that we're documenting modifications, we're evaluating post-program on the effectiveness. And then a couple through, and I'm going to go ahead and kind of skip ahead of these in terms of contracts, safety, and assessment documents. And then also just to getting to that, when do we say no? Has the designated official been involved in the determination? Is the denied request documented with a full explanation of what the assessment or the rationale was?